Good morning. Good morning. Today is day 5 of our seminar that looks at accreditation and quality assurance. And so we're going to be wrapping up today. We're going to focus our presentation today on program review and planning. Program review and planning. So I mentioned last time that the work that we do ties into the institution's strategy. And so today we're going to talk about the role that we play, how we're engaged in program review and planning activities. So if I can, I think one of the features of this program is to be able to compare and contrast approaches you take today with some of the approaches that are taken in the United States. And what I've tried to do throughout the week is describe the criteria that institutions in the United States follow to assure that they become accredited institutions and to focus on the advancement of their academic quality. So we have been going through that criteria from the beginning, and I've tried to point out the specific nature of that criteria. And then we've had discussions to talk about, what are you doing today that's related to that criteria, or what can you do to advance your activity related to that criteria. So I didn't want you to have the experience and miss the meaning of what we've been doing, because all along we've been somewhat comparing and contrasting. I will illustrate some activity today that are some of the practices employed by my institution as relates to program review and planning. And I would hope as you're thinking through this, you're thinking about the comparative approach that's taken here at Al-Baha University and here in Saudi Arabia. So let's start with our systems model. The one thing that we ended on last time was the criteria of the institution uses information gained from assessment to improve student learning, right? So we talked about this model of quality that we use. We talked about the results of this approach to quality should enable us to assess 3 things: the teacher, the learner, and the course, right? Somewhat different. And that whatever process we used, we recognize that there are many approaches to doing this. Many approaches, for example, to assessing teaching effectiveness, right? We talked about the pros and cons of surveys. We talked about observation methods. We talked about self-evaluations, use of video equipment. We talked about a number of options that are available to you. So the key there, though, is that the process and the methodology that we use reflects good practice, right? That if your peers came in and they saw your methods, that they would say, "Oh, that's a good method you're using," So it has to reflect good practice. But here's the other thing I would say to you today. The processes and the methods that we use to assess student learning should not only reflect good practice, but include the substantial participation of faculty and staff. Right? So you have to find a way, how do we get people engaged in this process? If I might ask you, are people more interested in engaging in assessment practices? Or is this something you have to work at as an institution to get people involved in this process? So I can tell you from my experience at my university, if I went back 15 years, most faculty members saw this as something else they had to do. I teach, I do research, I serve. What is this assessment thing? That's something else that you're asking me to do or you're making me do. But if you fast forward to today, most of our faculty today feel like it is an essential part of their work. It is not something else they do. It is what they do. We do assessment as part of our ongoing process to improve our teaching, improve our learning, improve our courses, improve our programs, improve our relationship with the community that supports it, right? It's part of what we do now. It wasn't always that way. So perhaps as you're thinking about this process of preparing for accreditation, and you're thinking about strategies for improving your quality of your programs and courses and faculty, you have to think about to what extent people are accepting this, and do we need to get their buy-in more, and what strategies or approaches might we take to get more buy-in to this? Because we put a lot of work into that 15 years ago. We don't talk about that anymore because it is what we do. But you may want to think about to what extent this is necessary for you to enroll and get the support of all faculty. Because the criteria is, do you have a substantial proportion of your faculty and staff involved in this process? That's the criteria we look at. The other thing that I would tell you, based on our work up to this point, is it's essential that you document this, that you document your ideas, your philosophies, that you document your processes. This is how we go about assessing faculty. This is how we go about assessing courses, assessing student learning. So document your processes. Document the results you get. As an example, we talked yesterday about some of the results of assessment and what would we do about it. You remember, I gave you cases. Here's what we learned from our assessment work. 3 faculty, good grades. 1 faculty member, bad grades. Okay? What do we do? How do we analyze it? So document the process, document the results you get from it, and document the decisions that you make to assure improvement. And we call that closing the loop. It's looking back at our model. We get the assessment data, the feedback. Does it improve our relationships with industry? Does it improve the quality of our design? Does it improve the quality of our experience with our students? That's the feedback loop, the decisions we make. Let me move on to another criteria. The criteria is, how does the university, how do we demonstrate a commitment to improvement by monitoring these 3 factors: retention, persistence, and completion. Retention, persistence, and completion. This may require a little bit of explanation. Actually, what I've discovered in my own experience is that these ideas, the first 2 in particular, retention and persistence, tend to be defined by universities themselves. Some universities define retention as the proportion of the students who complete a course. They've been retained throughout the course. Some may say retention is about a semester. Students stayed throughout the semester. Persistence is sort of an extended version of retention. It's how long they persist at the institution. And it might be that you decide that you want to monitor if students persist throughout the first year or the first 2 years of a program, or through to their residency. You may have you have to determine what persistence measure is important to you. So there's retention and persistence. The third measure is completion. They actually completed the program study and received a degree or diploma from it. It's completion of the program. You may have completion of your doctoral programs, completion of your master's programs, completion of your bachelor's. You may have certificate programs that lead to bachelor's degrees. So you monitor completion of the certificate program. But completion is coming to the conclusion of it. This is above and beyond what we've been talking about in terms of student success. It's looking at other indicators. And so let me ask you this question. This is sort of our first discussion activity. And again, it's cultural comparison because in the US, these three metrics are required by federal law that you report on them to the federal government. They want to know, are students being retained? Are they persisting at your institution? And are they completing their degrees? And the standards for these three conditions vary by institutional type. So for example, in universities where admissions criteria are pretty high, they expect pretty high retention, persistence, and completion rates. Our technical vocational schools, where students sort of are working full-time and going to class in occupation areas like technical occupations, pre-medicine, lab assistants, that sort of thing. The completion rate expectation is much lower, okay, because they figure that the students don't have time to dedicate full time to their studies, like someone who would enroll full time at a university that was a sort of elite, prestigious college. So my question to you is, do you have clear definitions of retention, persistence, and completion? And do you have goals for these areas? I'm going to stop there and allow you to talk about that. Do you have clear definitions for these three ideas? And do you have goals for these three ideas? There is no standard for all persons. It's all varies. The key is you set your own goal. How will you do those? That's really the you set a zero. Why are you business? Set 50%. It has to be a standard that makes sense. Okay, let's pull back together on this one. So, accrediting bodies want to know how effective institutions are, and we deal with learners. We deal fundamentally with learners, and so many learners start with us, and then they have an experience with us. They're on for a bit of a journey, taking a number of our courses and our programs. And so one factor we're concerned about is to what extent students are retained in the institution, they persist in their program of study, and they actually complete it. Let's take extreme views on this. Let's say you have an institution, there are 100 students who start and 0 finish. No one finishes the program. This seems a bit odd that we would even have this conversation, but I actually have seen a few programs of study that start large groups of students and have really few people who actually complete it. And for many accrediting bodies, this is a concern. So they say, what are you doing that you can't keep your students to completion? Because I would imagine that 100% of the students have the goal of completing when they start. So something's wrong here. So we need to know that you have, that you consider and observe these factors: the retention, persistence, and completion. It starts with having a definition of these ideas that's unique to your university. I would say that it would be a nice thing to try to compare this to what an American university holds, but I would tell you that American universities differ on these factors considerably because it depends. This one depends. It depends on the type of institution you are. It depends on your fields of study, and it probably makes more sense if you're looking at program accreditation to compare against other schools that offer similar programs to students who are similar in characteristic or demographic to your students.
No?
Yes, comment.
I think one of the problems is that here maybe in some countries there is no pre-college or not a preparatory period for the student before they enter the high school or the university. So they just come from the high school thinking that similar programs and similar they are not well prepared.
That is a challenge to retention and persistence.
Yes.
Yes. So if you know that, one of the things you might do is provide an opportunity for people who are less ready and prepared to heighten their level of readiness and preparedness. And some universities have student learning centers that help with this. Some have an orientation term where they deal with whatever that knowledge and skill gap is to get them ready and prepared for college level work. Some people have introductory courses that serve that purpose. So there are some strategies you might employ if this is a broader phenomenon, because fundamentally, this is the population of learners you're dealing with. You can't trade them out for another one, right? So you have to say, given this is the population of learners that we work with, what can we best do to support their success becomes the question. Okay. And thank you for that comment. So, do you have clear definitions of retention, persistence, completion? And do you have goals for it? What do you think? What was your thought about this when we started this conversation? Yes, hold on.
Concerning retention, persistence, and completion, the institute must have a clear definition and throughout the student from its beginning till complete the degree. Till complete the program and get the degree. For example, for retention, we need good explanation of the importance of we make good explanation of the importance of the program to the student, to the stakeholders, to the external environment. The make explanation for students in high school to prepare the attention of the students to attain this program.
Does your group, your faculty group, do you have clear definitions of these ideas? Retention means completion of courses. So persistence means the first year. Yeah, you guys can have that. Third year. And course completion is just they're done. That's the easiest definition, right? They're completed. Let me ask you this question. There's another comment. Yes.
What about the admission criteria itself? That play a role in the retention completion?
So, what are you asking about the admission criteria?
Maybe it's not well defined.
Yes. You know, we actually talked about that yesterday and somewhat day before yesterday, that we have a responsibility to assure that we express standards for admissions into our programs and courses. From a program standpoint, are there admissions requirements that are necessary to articulate that would enable a person who enrolled to be more likely to succeed in our programs, right? For courses, we talked about, did students complete the proper prerequisite courses to go into a particular course? And have we articulated that very well? And so a best practice is identifying admissions requirements and communicating that in your academic bulletin, on your website, and making sure that your selection of students match to your requirements. From the course standpoint, it is having a logical curriculum that expresses the prerequisite courses for any given course that requires it. And that is also expressed in your bulletin, and that your registrar offices demonstrate commitment in their process to putting students in the right courses. This is important. Those are key requirements that you have to have those things in place and well articulated. But once we get past admission requirements and students get into our university and they have classes with us, we have to focus on these three factors: retention, persistence, and completion. Right? Independent of admissions, these three factors matter. So let me ask you this question. Are you collecting data on these three factors? And what data are you collecting? I know someone who's already showed me that they're collecting some data on this, but I wonder if you are doing the same in your departments or colleges. Are you collecting data on retention, persistence, and completion? And what data are you collecting? Yes, we can keep this discussion open.
We have data about retention and the combination only. But resistance, we haven't any data about it. I think the admission policy play a role in the combination from preparation of the students of secondary school to enter in college or school. Because some students enter some college not interested in this college, but degrees contributed for this college. Orientation of the admission office only is the university.
You know, I'm going to confirm the relationship between admissions criteria and the likelihood of people succeeding in terms of retention, persistence, and completion. This is true. This goes back to institution types. Highly selective institutions that require almost near perfect test scores and they attract highly motivated learners. It will be expected of them that students are retained at a much higher rate, they persist at a much higher rate, and that they complete at a much higher rate. What you will need to do if you're dealing with a broader population of learners, more open admissions, for example, you have to just say, we deal with a broader population of learners, and they're less likely, and they're going to deal with more challenge with our curriculum, right? But regardless of that, you still have to have goals for retention, persistence, and completion. There's no way around that. We can't justify it by our students are different. We can't justify it. We have to have these goals because it is a measure of institutional effectiveness. It's a fundamental requirement of accreditation. So you can say we're dealing with more challenging students. We put support processes in place, and we're anticipating some attrition. That's okay. It's okay to say that. And if your goals from experience are that we're retaining 30% of our students or graduating 30%, that's in the context, it may make sense, right? Not a problem. but you have to have goals for it. Because the goals then become your benchmarks. And you can say, we're getting better at it over time, because we're doing different things to move from 30% to 35% or 30% to 40%. But you have to have the goals expressed and collect data that gives you some intelligence and a heightened awareness of how effective you are in working with the population you serve. Does all make sense? Yes.
It's very interesting to know that for us we are a highly selective faculty. That we are expecting that we have a high rate of retention, resistance, and completion of the course. But really, we don't know that if we have clear definitions on these three categories, but we can share only our observation. We are a new faculty, so okay, we are now by observation. We can tell you that we have a high rate of retention and persistence among our students, because what we observe that the students that you see in the first class, you can see most of them or all of them in the advanced classes.
So the methods I'm advocating then would be to say, how do we take our intuition and our sort of observations and document them in a way that we can convey that understanding to external reviewers. So we have a good sense that people, 85% of our students are, that we see in the first class. So let's say 95% or 90, that we see them in the first class, we see them in the last class. We feel good about that. But what we need to do is have some precise metrics around it that we can document and share with the reviewers that come in. So that's the aim. I have a comment or question.
I think this is
Yes, go ahead.
question from the women's side in Arabic. إلى أي حد يكون تناقص عدد الطلاب عند التخرج مقبول عند الاعتماد الأكاديمي? To which limit the reduction of the number of students when they graduate will be accepted in the academic accreditation? And I think it means the completion, what's the percentage of the completion accepted in the academic accreditation?
I think this will depend on the accrediting body. So I would bet that medical schools have some standard they hold around this, around retention and completion particularly. And you probably have pretty high admission standards to begin with. So there's that factor. But I think it will depend on your accrediting body, and they will probably have tiers based on the type of institution you are. Right? So if you are serving working adults, they may have I'm thinking about some of the business accrediting bodies right now. There are, if you think about business programs, you have executive MBAs, you have EMBAs, you have regular MBAs, you have MBAs for working adults, you have MBAs for traditional students that come out of bachelor degree programs. And I would bet they have very different standards for retention and completion. So what I would suggest, my answer would be, this may require a little bit of research, working with, talking to your accrediting body and say, do you have standards for this? Are targets that you would recommend for us as we start to set our goals for this? That would probably be your most reliable source, because they're also going to be the ones who are going to ultimately judge whether your goals make sense or not. Right? So just engage them early on. You know what? I would tell you, to engage your accrediting body in conversations about questions like this. It's a good thing to do that. Don't wait for them to just show up on campus and then, start to worry about, what their standards are, and you don't know, and all the confusion that could be around that. When you could, along the way, develop a relationship with them through asking questions. That says you're interested in knowing what they care about, you're interested in satisfying their requirements, and you're building a relationship while you're doing it. Right? I think it's a very positive thing to engage with your accrediting bodies. This is sort of targets and reference points are good ways to engage them.
No?
Yes.
I just I want to ask a question about you talk about retention, resistance, and completion. Did you mean failure? Because we have other factors as other difficulties, especially in the higher education in women school, or women college. We have other factors other than failure that play a role in retention, resistance, and completion. So I don't know if you are considering these other factors.
Well, what I'm presenting is value neutral right now. I'm just saying you have to track it. If you know that there are factors that contribute to retention and persistence, it's great to be able to document what those things are, to be able to say that. I'm not placing any judgment on the goals, the rates, what contributes to it. I'm just saying right now you have to have definitions of retention, persistence, and completion. You have to have goals for these things that you can express, and measures that you use to document. In the U.S., you have to contribute all this information into this federal database. And the federal government, one of the things that people get in trouble for in the United States is they draw on federal financial aid, they enroll students, and the students don't complete. This is a waste of federal government taxpayer dollars. There are politicians that are hot on this issue. In fact, you can look in American newspapers today, I'm sure there's some issues or discussions about the value of college education, persistence, and completion, given the amount of money that's invested in higher education. Right? So, for our discussion today, I'm not placing any value or judgment on why students don't complete. That is something that you should consider. What are the factors that are contributing to persistence or retention? Or the opposite of retention is called attrition. Why do they drop out? Why do they fail? There are factors that contribute to that. But I'm not talking about that today. I'm just saying let's make sure we get the data.
Okay. If you need to make a research, then you have to consider these other factors.
This is true. Yes. All right. So I think we sort of went around that point a whole lot. So I'm ready to move on. So we also want to know, as a measure of the success of our programs, what happens to our graduates after they leave the institution. So now the accrediting body is concerned that they are retained in the program, that they persist, and they ultimately complete it. That's one measure of institutional effectiveness. They're also concerned about what is their life like after they get their degree or complete their programs. Are they employable? Can they get jobs in their field? Are they upwardly mobile? Are they staying in their fields for some time? All those things matter. And so we talked a little bit about the idea of how do we have knowledge about our alumni. So what I thought I would do is ask you, what's important to your community, the kingdom, the institution, about the success of your graduates. What data do you see as important in determining the success of your graduates? What data do you determine to be important as it relates to the success of your graduates? Let's take a minute to talk about that. What do you see as important data to collect to give you a sense of whether your graduates are successful?
Hello?
Yes.
I think one of the data, necessary data, is the number of the graduates who have
The number of the graduates who, I'm sorry, I missed the last part.
jobs.
Okay. Okay. Let me give the group about 3 minutes to talk about this one. There's some that are rather self-evident. There may be some that are not. So what are the factors that you need to deal with? The number that get jobs after they graduate is certainly one of those factors. Great example. What are some others? Let's take a few minutes to discuss. Yes. need to log back in. I don't have the password.
Oh, password. Okay. Password.
Is it still broadcasting in them regardless? Okay, if that's true, I won't have to worry about it. Okay, let's go back together on this one. So there's a comment. Yes. Hold on 1 second. Wait till the room quiets. 1 second. Okay, go ahead with your comment.
Competency of
Hold on 1 second. I can't hear you. Hold on. All right, go ahead. Go ahead with your comment.
I said, what about the competency of the graduates themselves, or if they are competent enough in their job?
Yes. Okay. Very good. So, competence of the graduates and their sense of competence in their jobs, right, might be an important factor. So, those who have jobs and those who have jobs, their perception of their preparedness for those jobs might be a factor, right? So, let me put context to this again. We design courses and hire faculty and provide support research to learners so that they can stay with us and succeed in their classes, right? And we do everything to, if we're focused on quality, we're improving our outcomes, we're improving our activities, our learning activities, we're developing our faculty, we're doing all these things we've learned based on assessment data. But we also need to know what happens to our graduates after they leave the institution and whether we're ultimately successful, which is the outcome of our work, right? So, two things that we've talked about now are they getting jobs, and do they perceive themselves to be competent in those jobs? It's been suggested. Are they passing the boards, the board examinations? And what percentage or rate are they passing those boards? We talked about that as an example yesterday with nursing, right? Where there was one school that had very poor nursing grads relative to other schools. So absolutely, that's a factor. So what other factors might you consider? Yes, let's go here and then here.
I think first of all, if we write a good program outcomes, which is suitable for the companies, we be sure that all of our graduates becoming in the business field.
Good, thank you. It's good.
For medical students, we can collect the data progression, progression in the career. How many of them got specialization in certain fields?
You bring up a good point, because in some fields, sometimes your graduates don't just go to jobs, right? Sometimes they go on to advanced education, right? Or specializations. And doctors can specialize in some surgery or some other area that may require 2 or 3 more years of study or residency. Some students might go on from bachelor's to master's degrees and then the PhDs. So their acceptance rate into those programs would also be an indicator, wouldn't they? Wouldn't it be an indicator of your success if you're putting them out and they're qualified to go on for further education? Yeah. So that will be an important factor to pay attention to. Other thoughts on this subject? Yes, ladies first. Okay, ladies first. Yes.
fields like my field, English literature, how you can manage or consider the graduate success? Can we consider the depth of knowledge as a criteria? For example, going to period of the English literature, how to analyze, for example, a poem or a novel. Can we consider this as criteria for measuring the success of the graduate?
This is a very interesting question you asked, because, I wonder if there are standards in your field related to outcome expectations. So it would more probably align with something like this: the number that have published books, or the number of publications, or those who have gone on to teaching assignments. I mean, there has to be some sort of outcome expectation of the learner that you can measure. That's not psychosocial. It has to be something that you can measure in terms of the expectation of what your graduates should be doing when they finish your programs. So that may be more of a challenge in your field, but I'm sure there's some documentation or standards for that.
What do you think, sir, about the BA level? How it can help, for example, a student who is a graduate from English literature receiving his bachelor's degree that he is successful, or I don't know, but how we can measure that? Especially BA level, I mean.
You may want to benchmark one or two classes before you actually set your goals. So, you might say, where are our graduates going? Are they going on to graduate school? Are they going on to, I know a lot of English majors that go on to law school. What are the patterns of our graduates? And to set a goal and an expectancy based on experience. So you might be going from practice to theory first before you sort of come up with a theoretical goal for what they should be doing. That may be something that helps you create your survey of learners. If you can get a sense for what people have actually done, you can then create your survey on your present, on future alumni, see how they're doing relative to that past experience. I don't know, let me ask this group the same question she asked me. English majors, bachelor's degrees, what sort of measures might you use to determine outcomes of the graduates? Outcome, alumni success. We're talking alumni success. What might be an indicator of that for English graduates? Are you fully challenged by this question?
Yes. I think we have to collect the needs of the private markets and to decrease the gap between the private market and those from those programs.
That would certainly be a secondary source of information, but I think important nonetheless, right? If you're graduating a lot of students in game design, and there are 0 job opportunities in game design in your market, that becomes somewhat of a challenge, and probably explanatory in terms of opportunities for your students to go on a successful alumni. But in some fields, let's say IT, there may be big gaps in terms of the number of openings and the number of skilled people to fill them. Maybe there are 10,000 openings and you're only graduating 50 people. You would expect them to get hired pretty quickly, so they would be successful in their careers. English literature, this is an interesting one. Yes?
I don't have an answer for that, but I can suggest for them to create such clubs for alumni to postgraduate clubs or meetings to see what they think about their graduation and to see where these graduates go.
I think that's a very smart suggestion.
In some faculties, there is so-called postgraduate services or services office. And postgraduate groups or clubs can be initiated online with the social media, which give an idea of what they are doing now.
So if we anticipate that there would be a problem in job placement or career options for English major graduates, then we could conceivably create a better support structure for them at the institution, either through student clubs or career services that target that particular population and provide them with the kind of resources that increase the likelihood of their being successful in career post-university studies. I want to share with you what one university has done. I tried to pull my own data up, but I couldn't pull it up this morning. But I could pull up Brown University's data. So what I'm going to share with you is what Brown University in the United States, it's one of the Ivy League schools, along with Cornell, Harvard, Yale, Princeton. It's in that category of schools. So they're highly selective, but my reason for sharing that with you today is to give you a sense of the kinds of questions they're asking their alumni a few years out. That gives them information that they can communicate to their stakeholders. Again, stakeholders are a group we talked about before. These are the people who care about the success of the institution, right? And stakeholders care about alumni material, alumni information. This is a big thing for them. So, let me pull up the, so this is Brown University on the East Coast in, I think it's Connecticut, and their alumni data. So, alumni survey, about 1/3 of each class responds. They get about 36% response rate from their alumni. That's a pretty good rate of response for an alumni survey. They ask the following questions. How satisfied are you with your education at Brown? And as you can see, most of the learners are very satisfied with their experience. So they want to know that learner satisfaction is a factor. I think if your learners are satisfied, they're more likely to go and tell other people about your university and attract more students to your university. So that's probably a factor they ask for that kind of purpose, to get a sense for that. Would you encourage a high school student who has a similar background to your own to attend Brown? Does this remind you of a question we talked about the other day? That one indicator? I said, would you recommend this course? Would you recommend this faculty to other students? Well, Brown University, that's one of the ones that's a big factor for them. Would you recommend this university to other students like yourself? Basically what they're asking. Pretty powerful indicator. And the response rate, pretty high, definitely would. Right? That's a good sign. Percentage who have enrolled in graduate professional degree programs since graduating from Brown. We just talked about that one, right? It's like not everybody's going to go on to employment right away. Some are going to go on to further education. Our English graduate may go on to law school or may go on to further studies, master's in English. Ultimately, with the goal of being a teacher or a professor. So we have to measure education as well for bachelor's degree programs. And then, of course, they indicate of those alum who have completed degrees. What proportion have actually completed degrees in that time frame? And that's indicated on their alumni survey. Then they get into careers. employment status at time of the survey. So just about close to 100% of them have been employed. That's a good sign. In what sectors are they employed? So you get a sense for the sectors that they're employed. Industry, classification, what industries are they employed in? You see, maybe our English majors are in media or journalism. You see higher education. There's law, finance, etc. These are the careers. And this particular technique they use to report gives you the relative size of the student population who are in those fields. So there are more students in medicine, higher education, and law than there are in politics, media, and computer science, for example. That's how this works, this particular. The font size corresponds with the population that indicated it. Yes. You can do this. There's a program that allows you to do this.
They are doing good in this.
They're doing good in medicine, higher education, and law. That says something about the institution, doesn't it? How well did Brown prepare you for your current career? This is what one of our colleagues in the other room brought up. Your own sense of self-efficacy, if I can redefine it, but your own sense of confidence and competence around your work. And so they asked the question, how well did our education prepare you for your career? And how satisfied are you with your career so far? It would be interesting to be able to correlate this on an individual level, see if there's relationships here between their preparation and their satisfaction. And then they ask questions about their life. How important is each of the following to you in your career? And they ask about family, and let's see if there are other factors here. Oh, there's a long list. Family, helping others, gaining recognition, learning about different cultures and nations. It's really interesting, and I bet a lot of these are actually tied to learning outcomes in the programs. In fact, my alumni survey, when we ask these questions about how important each of the following have to do with their life right now, we go back to the learning outcomes of programs, and we go back to the institutional outcomes, and we re-express them here and see if that's still important to them in their life. So, we might emphasize global knowledge in our programs and realize that most of our graduates, that's not such a care for them. Or maybe we don't emphasize it much, and when they get out into the world, it is a big deal for them. That might say to us, we need to incorporate more of that into our curriculum. Yes, go ahead.
What about employer satisfaction and the data from employer satisfaction and parent satisfaction?
So employers,
Is it important or not?
yeah. So what we're talking about right now are alumni responses, right? But you could also, let's talk about good practice and best practice. Good practice, connect with what your alumni think in their experience some years after they graduate. Best practice, if you can survey employers, that's marvelous, And I'm going to show you a tool that can help you determine which one you should survey. Right? I'm going to help you with that one. Because it would be a great thing for you to do if you could tap into the employers and say, what's been your experience with our graduates? That takes a lot of work on their side unless you can help them with that. If you can provide them with information on who your graduates are that work for them, it will make their lives a lot easier and their responses more valid. Okay? Otherwise, they will generalize to their whole workforce. And you know what that means, don't you? If they generalize to their whole workforce, it's likely going to be a bell curve distribution. They're going to say, well, we got a bunch of graduates here who don't know how to work in teams. And I've seen that happen before. So the best thing for you to do, if you care about parent perspectives or employer perspectives, is to provide them with some basis for evaluation. Parents, I'm not so certain, but employers, I don't know any institution that does a parent survey. I have to check on that. But employer surveys, people do quite a bit.
And clients.
Pardon?
And clients.
And clients, yes. Those are important stakeholders. So really what we're saying is there a way to touch your stakeholders and get information from them about the nature of their experience with our graduates? So clients, businesses, government.
One of the challenges is the number of surveys submitted to the students. How many surveys that be acceptable for the students submitted to the students? Most of the surveys directed to students.
Surveys what?
Directed to students. How many surveys per semester or per year can the students submit to the college or the institution?
I think I understand your question. Is it predicated on this idea that we could potentially over-survey students? Yeah, so we have to be mindful of that. And so at my university, we have a policy. We have to approve any surveys from an office, from one office, that we would administer to students. And we don't let our own students conduct survey research on our student populations because we want to survey them on the things that are most important to our institution, right? And current student surveys and their perceptions of our courses and faculty are the key because it helps us improve our quality, it helps us with our accreditation. Any of those other surveys, no thank you. We're pretty mindful of surveying our population, and we have policies for that. You may want to consider that too. Because I would agree with you, you can't over-survey students. And it's unfair to them, and it takes up too much time, they've got work to do. But we're talking right now about alumni, and we're likely talking about surveying them 3 years out, or maybe 5 years out. So they're not over-surveyed from the institution's perspective. We have to be mindful of over-communicating with them sometimes, because we have a marketing department, we have alumni affairs, they like to do fundraising, gifts and grants from alums, so we have to be mindful of that. But from the survey standpoint, we typically do this once every 3 years or 5 years out of the program. So we have this, how important are these issues to you? Here the drop-down box. Likely to be at learning outcomes from the programs and from the university. We'll take one more comment. We'll take it from the other room, then we'll go on break, and then I'll come back and show you some techniques you might use to identify some of those key stakeholders if you're interested in surveying them. Yes, go ahead with your comment.
I think that we must inform our students that why we are looking to survey. Because the majority of the students, they don't know why we are doing this survey.
Well,
so they ignore responding to the survey.
Well, I'm going to go one step further than that with you and say that it is a best practice if you inform learners why they are completing the survey. And we use this data to improve our teaching, to improve our courses, to improve your learning experience. That's why we need to get feedback from you. Context is everything. And I think the majority of us don't do a good job providing context. It's a leadership skill. It's an executive skill. Providing context for people. Right? It will heighten their motivation to complete the survey if they know that it's intended to improve the nature of their experience, our future students like them in their experience. Right? So that's a very important thing. The second part of this, and a better practice, is actually sharing some of the results in some aggregated way with the learners, our public. Right? Because a lot of times we get survey data from the students, we collect it, we analyze it, and students never get feedback on what the results were. So if you have some aggregated way, it doesn't have to identify people, you never want to do that. But if you aggregate the data and say, in general, this is what we've learned, like they've done with this alumni survey, they put it on the website, right? Then people are more inclined to complete the survey if they see the results. So this is another thing as a best practice. So that's my addition to your comment. With that said, let's go ahead and take a break. When we come back, I'm going to show you a couple techniques that will enable you to identify those stakeholders, and you can decide whether or not it's important for you to survey them or not. Thank you. And I can give you I would love for you to get in contact with me. So if I can give you my LinkedIn, if you use LinkedIn, I'll help you do that. And I'm on Twitter as well.